Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Jamie Burke, founder and CEO of Outlier Ventures. He is here to talk about all things Metaverse 101. Jamie, it is great to have you back with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks for having me again.
All right. And, at the beginning of 2021, we weren't talking about Metaverse. And then you get to the end of the year, you get into 2022. Now we see products all over the place that incorporate Metaverse companies. And it seems to really be the buzzword, Jamie. But explain to us exactly what the Metaverse is.
Yeah, I mean, dare I say it, we might even be entering into Metaverse fatigue. But so, 101 on what the Metaverse is, you can think of it in a number of different ways. On the one hand, it's kind of the meme or narrative that allows for people to begin to think about the future that they do and they don't want in the context of the web. It's also an economic revolution as much as it is a technological one. And this is a really important thing for us at Outlier to think of this as this open economic system where more kind of time is being spent and more value is being generated. Increasingly, people are deriving an income from it. I think the really important thing to think about with the metaverse is that it doesn't necessarily require ubiquitous XR, AR or VR, although that will make it more immersive. It's really just this point where the digital and the physical life becomes indistinguishable from one another.
Right. So, Jamie, how is it being leveraged then?
Yeah, so I mean, there are different ways of looking at it in that Facebook, for example, and a lot of big tech will talk about the metaverse really in the context of their kind of hardware or software environments, allowing people to live out more of their social or working life in increasingly immersive environments. And whilst of course that's great, I would argue many of these things aren't the metaverse. They're just a game or a social media platform. They're effectively closed environments. For us, actually, the true implementation of the metaverse is for it to be meta, for it to be the metaverse. It must be bigger than any one platform. It must be the thing that connects platforms or verses and allows for interoperability, not just interoperability of user experience, but also of economic value in exchange. And so the closest thing or the only thing that I can see out there that looks like that is crypto, or what's now being referred to as Web3. And so for us, the only real implementation of the metaverse is what we're seeing in blockchain with virtual worlds like Sandbox, play to earn gaming economies like Axie Infinity, and these other various environments.
So, Jamie, I guess what I struggle to try to understand is, when you think of Web3, when you think of Metaverse, it's really being pitched as a way to democratize access, give the user more control over their data, more control over their experience. It's certainly opening up economic channels. That's what makes it different from Facebook, from Google, from Apple, where there's no ownership over the ecosystem. But at some point, and I'm sure it's happening already, in fact, I know it's happening already, you're going to see massive funds that have the money to help build up the metaverse come in, and that kind of takes away from the democratization user-owned story here. I mean, is there a risk of it becoming more centralized as these larger players come in and take more control over the ecosystem?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The important innovation here is the idea of digital property rights, the idea that users can own digital value, however that's represented, right? And they can exit a given platform economically, and they can recoup at least the cost that they've invested in that, or they can generate a profit on time spent. And so that's a great way to distinguish is or isn't something in the metaverse. You're absolutely right. The promise of that, again, as I said, as an economic system, is that it allows for greater financial inclusion. The idea that there's a huge amount of digital value that is not currently recognized by the existing financial system. Gamers can't go to a bank and say, well, I'm a millionaire in Fortnite, can I get a mortgage, right? That's just not going to happen. They are whole generations of financially excluded from the current system because it can't value digital value, and that digital value doesn't actually belong to the user. So that's kind of the promise. As you say, look, the reality is it is also an open, permissionless capital market. And naturally, value will accrue in, pockets or areas of that, be it a fund, be it a platform, be it a whale, is often referred to in the context of NFT holders or whatever. The point is that it is a democratization of access to that economic system, not necessarily something that's going to lead to greater equality. What I will say, however, is that I personally experienced this as a 40-year-old running a business of over 100 people. I am at a disadvantage, despite this being my day job, because I don't have the time and attention to be following its fast-paced innovation in a way that, let's say, a teenager could. And so I always say, yes, if you've got capital, it's easier to make capital in the system, but actually attention is the most valuable commodity in this space. If you have attention, you can generate outsized returns even without capital.
Jamie, and that's such an interesting point that you make. We had another guest on the show last week, essentially having the same kind of conversation where the younger generation just is growing up on platforms like this. They don't know life, especially in their adult life, without some sort of digital platform as part of their economy. It almost seems like the metaverse is going to have to be successful. Otherwise, you're excluding the next largest generation from the way they see the economy, from the way they see the job market.
Yeah, I mean, look, you don't have to explain the metaverse to anybody under 20, right? And again, this idea of distinguishing between the physical and real life, they just don't do it, right? Digital is so interwoven into their very existence. They might socialize more digitally and virtually than they do physically. So these are just established norms. Equally, I think it's more obvious to these people who've invested a huge amount of time and in some cases money into platforms that actually being able to own things that are digital would be incredibly valuable. I wouldn't say it's totally obvious to everybody. We've seen even in gaming, there's a bit of a backlash against NFTs. For some reason, it's seen as somehow corrupting, gaming culture, that it might make everybody just focused on how they can make a quick buck or, scams or whatever it is. But I think the reality is with time, users, the idea of digital property rights becomes obvious. And once experienced, you're never going to go back. You're never going to go back to a world without digital property rights.
Wow, so interesting. This is great. If you're taking a sociology class and just looking at the way we've evolved, even in the past, 10 to 20 years, not even a generation. So Jamie, super interesting. We thank you as always for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thanks for having me.